Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Ben Freda to talk about AI and nonprofits. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So, as we begin this conversation, I was wondering if you could share your superhero origin story.
I love that. Yeah, sure. I Let me think for a second. How did I get into working for nonprofits and technology? I started actually not in nonprofits or technology at all. I moved to New York in 2001, right before 9/11, to go to law school. And when I graduated law school, I did what I think most people that go to law school do, which is realize they have a whole bunch of loans and take a job at a big law firm to help pay off those loans. So, like so many of my classmates did, I did that as well, and that was in 2004. And you kind of do that to keep your options open, right? You don't know what you want to do in life, so it's kind of and you can make money and pay your loans off. So I did that, but very quickly found that I was doing work that I did not care about, which I think is a very common story. But I had one case, for instance, where we were representing a company that made wet wipes. And we were, those wet wipes, we were suing a different company that made wet wipes over exactly how they made their wet wipes, which was one of the big cases I spent a lot of my life working on. Another one, for example, a lot of the work that my law firm did, we did a lot of securities litigation. So basically, we would represent a bank that had underwritten a company that was doing an IPO. And then what typically happens is a company does an IPO, they sell a bunch of shares of stock right out of the gate at a high rate. Somehow something happens and the stock crashes, and a bunch of shareholders get together and sue the bank saying you must have lied about something about the company. That's why the valuation was artificially high. And so they get these cases all the time, and we would defend them. And so, it was very like high stress, high anxiety, high workload type life. And at the same time, it just utterly and completely did not matter to me. Like the outcome didn't matter to me. And also didn't matter to anybody I knew. Nobody in my family cared which wet wipe company came out on top. And I couldn't even imagine knowing anybody to whom this mattered. Do you know what I mean? So, I felt pretty weird about it. I felt like I was at loose ends. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And at the same time, it was 2004. So, but 2000, and we think like, oh, this election 2024 is like so vitriolic and terrible, which it is. But every election is a bit like that. And back in 2004, it was George W. Bush versus John Kerry. Two wars, right, had been started. And somebody at my law firm was close to the Democratic Party. And so they put out a call for poll watchers in the state of New Mexico. And a lot of my family is from New Mexico. And so I thought it'd be interesting to do. And I went down there and helped do poll watching, which is just to make sure that no shenanigans happen at the polling places. And New Mexico at the time was like one of the big battleground states. Not anymore, but it used to be. And the work I did down there and just being around those people and being part of that community, so exciting, so interesting, really fired me up. I felt like this really matters to people that I care about. So I had that experience, and then I had to come back and do my wet wipes work, which again was a bit of a crash. And at the same time, around then I got a call from one of my really good friends named Ryan Osmick, who I think.
I do.
Who runs PicNet, a company down in DC. Shout out to Ryan, runs Soapbox Engage. At the time, he was looking for people to join him. And he was one of my oldest friends, old high school friend of mine, great person. And he needed somebody to work out of New York, where I was living, and somebody to do some sort of COO type operations work. I didn't know anything about operations, but I knew the guy. So, and I had availability. So, and he was doing websites for nonprofits. So I thought, okay, interesting. So I ended up jumping in and helping him with that. Worked there for 4 years, had an incredible experience working with clients I really cared about, as opposed to the wet wipe clients. People doing, spending their lives doing good for the world. Did that for a couple of years and then ended up going out on my own and starting BFC Digital. We've done web development and web design and now AI consulting for nonprofits for about 15 years and have never looked back. Have never gotten the urge to go back into corporate law ever again. Although I guess never say never, but I think it's a pretty safe call that won't happen. Anyway, that's a long-winded answer, but that's the story.
It's not the most uncommon story either, in the sense that I also started, with a wide range of career paths and different industries, and felt it was not feeding my soul. And the moment I got to the nonprofit sector, it's like, okay, I found my people. They
Yeah.
all low ego, more impactful. How can we
Yeah.
help? How can we improve the community? And it's so sticky. Once you get in there, at least for me, and for you, and for a lot of people on the show here, it's
Mm.
just so sticky. Once you find these people, it's like, okay, finally, I can breathe. I can feel like I'm making a difference, even if it's a small one. At least it's not wet wipes, which is funny.
Yeah, you're right. It's funny. It's kind of like a tribe, right? Like those of us
Hmm.
working in nonprofits, social impact, and even I guess even the technology side is even a smaller tribe. But yeah, these are our people, right? Like, yeah, generally very low ego, generally very interesting, generally very curious, interested in making a difference in the world, positive difference in the world, whatever way that's interpreted. Yeah, I agree.
I know at the beginning of when AI was introduced, let's call it popularized, not introduced, but popularized with ChatGPT and so forth. There was a lag or a desire to not for nonprofits not to jump on the bandwagon too quickly. I think it's a general trend. It's one I push for too. That nonprofits don't have that ability to jump into new technologies too quickly, too early, and not to be an early adopter because they don't have the same safety nets as for-profit companies do. So once something has been tried and tested, then it makes sense for them to get involved. We're definitely past or in that phase now with nonprofits and AI. So there are different, I know there's different ways of using it. There's different kinds of AI. So let's start maybe very, very broad first as a conversation, then we can work our way down to a more specific granular level. There's more than one kind of AI, as we know, right? And I was wondering if you could just maybe paint a picture of the different kinds and what each one of them does.
Yeah, sure, totally. And this is where it gets pretty confusing pretty quickly. So for a lot of people, the other thing that I'll preface everything I say about AI is that AI changes extremely quickly. So anything I say today, take with a grain of salt, might not be right tomorrow. But that said, there are a bunch of different types of AI. The one that is, of course, most sort of thought of and talked about and discussed today is generative AI. So that's what became very popular with ChatGPT, and that I think is the one that's most relevant for nonprofits today, at least small to medium sized nonprofits that are starting to dip their toes into this technology. So Gen AI, short for generative AI, is about giving a computer text and having text come out of it, or giving a computer text and having images come out of it. So you're generating, that's why it's called generative. You're generating some sort of textual response from the computer. So ChatGPT is the ultimate example of this. Most people know ChatGPT right now. You put some text into ChatGPT, you can get text out. And the text you put in can be anything from, write me a poem in the style of a Shakespearean sonnet about Salesforce, or it could be, I'm going to dump in a bunch of email addresses and I want you to pull out the domains, or it can be anything that has to do with text. So that's the most common version that nonprofits are going to interact with, at least these days. There are a whole bunch of other types of AI. So there's machine learning, which is an entire area of trying to get the computer to sort of understand patterns in a huge data set over time. There's visual AI, so the kind of AI that's like in a driver, a self-driving car, where it's looking out for images and making decisions very quickly about what image input it gets. And, there's natural language processing, which is similar to Gen AI in terms of understanding languages, but uses a totally different sort of mechanism and set of algorithms to do its processing. There's predictive AI, where you can go and dump in a bunch of historical data and it will try and pick out patterns in that data and give you a sense of the future. So there are a whole bunch of different types. I think for most people, when they're looking on LinkedIn, or they're going to a conference and there's a session on AI, they're really talking about Gen AI. So how are you going to get, how are we going to use these tools like ChatGPT, or image generators like Midjourney or Dolly or whatever to get images out?
Yeah, I anticipated you saying Gen AI for sure as the most popular one. I want to spend just a minute before we go on the predictive AI, because that is used especially in the for-profit world and especially in CRMs in being able to try to predict what a particular outcome might be for an account or for an opportunity, to help figure out where a salesperson should spend their time. Because they might have hundreds of thousands of contacts. They each have different various informations about them. And rather than trying to hit all of them at once, which of course is very difficult to do, you can have predictive AI to say, look, out of all of these, here are the top candidates for whatever you're trying to accomplish. Here's why. And then someone can then contact these people so they don't have to go through the entire list. And there is a certain element of that that could be done or used by nonprofits. And so I just want to spend a bit more time on that one for a second, because if they're looking for people who want to become major donors, right? You're a minor donor, you want to become a major donor, something like that could be actually very useful. So before we throw that one away, is there anything that, anything that can be said about predictive AI that can be used by a nonprofit in any way?
Yeah, totally. I think you hit on the one where it's probably going to be most useful at the moment, which is how to predict donor behavior. So, you kind of know this intuitively, but what people do in the past is similar to what they're going to do in the future. You can also, as a nonprofit, try and set up a system where you're taking donors from being small donors to medium donors to large donors, right? So, and it's helpful to save time and energy. You don't want to waste time and energy on the ones that are never going to end up that way, right? Like you have a limited amount of time. So, so predictive AI can help you do that. Two things to say about it. I think a lot of tools that you're already using, like Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or whatever, there are predictive AI tools that are constantly being developed and built in on those. So, and will over the next year or 2 years. So if you're in those systems, keep an eye out for product updates, right? Like there's going to be ways in Salesforce, in Microsoft, Dynamics to, hey, who are my most likely donors in the future, right? Now that works if all of your data is in those systems, right? If it's not all in those systems, that's useless to you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there are a few low cost sort of predictive AI tools that you can install, use on your data. Now that's a higher level of cost and investment, right? Because you have to often pay for a license for these things, install it somewhere, run it somewhere, learn how to format your data in the particular way that the system wants the data to go into it so it can give you a response that actually makes sense. But just a couple you can Google, RapidMiner Studio. There's a couple of others. Microsoft Azure machine learning is a good tool that sometimes people use. The level of effort to set yourself up on that is going to be relatively high. You're going to need somebody who knows what they're doing to do it. And that's fine. Maybe it's in a lot of cases, it's going to be very worth it. For the small to medium sized nonprofits, you might not be quite there yet, but if you are, interested in really taking this seriously, that's sort of where I would go.
So the takeaway for me is if you're using a CRM, and you should be, look for a CRM that has an AI, a predictive AI already integrated or soon to be integrated, so that you don't have to go that second route, even though that might be worth it for certain organizations. It's much easier, especially for the small and medium ones, to go for something that has it built in and you just leverage that tool.
Yeah, exactly. And they're developing this quickly. I actually think in you are probably just as much an expert on this as I am, this part of it, the CRM part. But I feel like for companies like Salesforce, company like Microsoft Dynamics, whatever the CRM is, I do feel like they are probably pretty worried at the moment that there are so many tools out there now that are becoming so much easier to use due to this AI technology that it's not really the tool that makes the difference anymore. It's really the data. So I can take my Salesforce data, export it, and put it into some other system like RapidMiner or whatever, and get a lot of the same insights that I would get out of Salesforce. So I think there's going to be a lot of movement by those companies to keep their people in Salesforce, keep their people in Microsoft Dynamics by bringing those tools in, because I think they know if they don't, they're going to lose customers pretty quickly. So anyway, I'm not an expert on what's coming down the pipe for the CRMs, but you probably know more than I do. But I would look into that first before shelling out for these other systems, both license fees and expertise.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's sufficient for what I was hoping to accomplish, just to make sure that we understand and set the level field for what predictive AI is. So let's jump more back into the Gen AI side, the ChatGPTs of the world, and text to text, text to image. So from what I've heard in conversations with a lot of people in the nonprofit space, the most common use case is they're not actually using the Gen AI as part of another tool, or integrated as part of a tool, I should say. They're using it as a separate entity. So they have their whatever data they're looking at, and then they go to ChatGPT and say, okay, draft me an email that will help, increase volunteers in this sector, and blah, blah, blah. And then they use that in, emails or different ways of coming up with ideas to do things, versus taking data that they already have and then using a ChatGPT type style or Gen AI to do something with that data. Is there other use cases that maybe I'm not thinking of, or is that really what you see as well?
Yeah, I generally see really a third way of using it being the best, quote unquote, best right now for nonprofits. I actually don't think that Gen AI is a great writer for you. I don't think it's great at least ChatGPT, Claude, those other models are great at doing predictive stuff or graphing data or whatever. I do think that the best way to look at this is to realize that now that there are these LLMs out there, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, whatever, everybody at a nonprofit all of a sudden got basically a guilt-free intern to do all of their boring, terrible, hair-pulling, rote, repetitive type tasks that they hate doing. So the things that Gen AI happens to be really good at are the things that you would want to use an intern for. You know what I mean? Like, and I hate to use that word intern because I know interns are humans, and a lot of times internships are set up to sort of give the people that are in them some benefit or some like advancement in their career. So, so I'm really using the term in terms of like a robot intern. But the things that you would be comfortable or want to give to that kind of assistant, Gen AI is super good at. So, what are some of those things, right? Like, for instance, let's say you have done a webinar, right? A recorded webinar, and you want someone to write up a summary of that webinar. Maybe you want someone to take that summary and turn it into bullet points, right? Maybe you want each bullet point to be a different post on a social media platform. Or, maybe you have, and I'm sure so many nonprofit staff have familiarity with messing with the formatting of data, right? Or a spreadsheet. So let's say you have a list of attendees to an event and you really want that list to be a CSV doc, right? Or you want it to be importable into a different system. And you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to take a spreadsheet, or I'm going to take a written, Word document, and I'm going to do find and replace on all of the spaces and put commas in there instead and quote marks around so it goes into a CSV, but it's going to get messed up because sometimes there are two spaces and blah, 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 blah. We've all had that experience of having to create data formatting, right? ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini will do that for you instantaneously, right? So that's another one. Another example is, what would you use an intern for? You would, maybe you have a monthly report that you give to your board about some sort of metrics, right? Like, I don't know, donors or event attendees or number of people we reached out to or phone banking or whatever. And you give that report every month, right? You might have an intern take last month's report, rip out all the stuff that was specific to last month, put in, this month's data, and then you're going to take it back from the intern and write the executive summary and send it out. So that is exactly the sort of stuff that ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini can be super good at doing. So those kind of tasks where you're working on the computer and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this just doesn't take any brain power, doesn't really take any creativity, and is something that a computer should be able to do. A computer now, as of this year, for the first time in human history, can probably do that for you. You know what I mean? And that is the sort of thing where I feel like nonprofits can really start to take advantage of it, right? Because what if you've got a nonprofit organization, let's say you're serving, I don't know, let's say it's legal aid for, Brooklyn. So you've got maybe 200 people on your staff that are doing this kind of admin work, right? What if every single one of them all of a sudden tomorrow had an intern? Like, how much would their productivity increase? Like a lot, right? Like 10%, maybe 20%, something like that. So, but you also, as you're doing that, you also need to realize that the Gen AI tools also have the same downsides as interns do, right? So let's say you have an intern, right? The intern probably has never done the task before, right? Has never done it before. So you have to give them a lot of instructions on how it's supposed to be done, right? The intern also doesn't really know what's good work or bad work because they're just starting. So when you get a response from them, like a report, you've got to read it and give them feedback and tell them you got to rewrite the first paragraph, or you got to, you did, instead of commas, you did semicolons and it's supposed to be commas, and you got to type that in and tell them. The good thing about the AI is that it will respond to you and give you the next version like instantaneously, and you don't have to wait for the intern to go do it. You know what I mean? So another one is, the intern is a brand new person right out of high school or college. They don't know what the values of your organization are. So they don't know how you talk. They don't know how you treat people. They don't know what's important to you guys. They don't know what's not important to you guys. So you have to be really careful about what it comes up with and make sure that it's speaking in a language that makes sense to your organization. And then lastly, interns are not that great at facts, right? So they don't have much experience. They don't know, let's say you're a health nonprofit, right? Doing research on childhood obesity, right? Like a bunch about that topic, and you have a bunch of facts at your disposal. They don't know the facts, and they will make them up. Like the interns will make up the facts. So you have to be really careful to double check any facts that your AI intern gives you. Now, those are the downsides, right? But as long as you know what those downsides are, you can start to work these guilt-free, interns who are happy to take your rote, boring work. They're happy to do it. They're cheerful to do it. You can start integrating them, and everyone on your staff can have one. You know what I mean? Everyone on your staff can have somebody to do that, and it costs like $20 a month, per person. So anyway, so if we can start to have this kind of mindset where we're bringing in these assistants to help us with this boring, terrible work we hate doing, you can really start to see the benefit of getting a lot more done with a lot less, pain and suffering, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I was thinking of a use case too, where I've used it, where I had an image with text on it, and I asked ChatGPT or Gemini to, OCR it to figure out what are
Yeah.
the characters in the image, and it was perfect out of the gates. And yeah, doing file formatting and is also a task that people seem to forget it can do. It's not just creating text. To your point, there's a lot of just really basic tasks that it can do. Very powerful, saves you a lot of time. And then if it doesn't work, you said the first time, you said you can correct it and make it do updates based on your feedback. So I totally agree. These admin tasks, fantastic use of a Gen AI. But as you're doing this, as you're sharing information with these Gen AIs, I know that there's a different kinds of privacy models, because some organizations might not want to share some of this data with an AI, especially a public AI that everyone can use, and it'll use itself to become better in the future. So is there any, or how do you advise nonprofits to be cautious of the data that they're giving to these AIs versus, an alternative that where maybe they could have a private AI? I'm not sure how these days how easy it is to get one, but the idea is that whatever you're sharing with that AI is not shared with anybody else. It stays within that AI only.
Yeah, totally. So that's really important for a lot of nonprofits, particularly, any nonprofit that is using sort of personally identifiable type data. So healthcare providers or legal, providers, or anybody who's providing something to humans, can be really important to keep the privacy, front and center. So getting to that AI as sort of your willing intern analogy, imagine you don't trust your willing intern not to spill the beans about everything it's doing after work at happy hour. You know what I mean? Like, what would you give that like loose-lipped, willing intern to do? What would you be willing to give them? So that's the kind of stuff you want to give your ChatGPT. So there are a couple of, I think, things that people tend to be too conservative about when they think about sharing data to an LLM like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever. Number one is there now are privacy settings on all of them to opt out, if you pay, from having the model remember what you've told it. Now, the question there is, do you trust the tech companies to follow what you put in the settings? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Some of them, Google, do you trust Google? I don't know. That's really a choice you have to make yourself. But all of them do have opt-out provisions in the settings. The other thing that I think people don't really get is that it's not like the models are constantly training themselves. That's not how it works, right? They're not taking in your whatever you put in, and then tomorrow's model will have that in there somehow. Like that's not really how it works. So these models are trained. First of all, to train a new model takes a ton of time and a ton of resources. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars to retrain ChatGPT, right? So, and every time they do it, they're expanding the universe of things that they're processing, the training data, which is basically the entire internet. Anything that's ever written on the internet or ever put on YouTube or whatever gets ingested into this model. And out of all of that stuff, they create these probability tables, which helps them figure out when to say what word. I mean, that's how they work. So it's not like Yeah, and so if the model was to save your data to train the next version, I'm sure they will, right? Because they'll be training the next version on whatever English language or whatever language text they can come up with. But it's not like it's going to show up tomorrow's version. You know what I mean? Maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. So the third thing to say about that is that there are ways to anonymize data before sending it to a public LLM. So, like, let's say you have a list, and you have to do this if you are subject to like HIPAA requirements, for instance. There are many healthcare providers now who are using ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini to write medical reports for their patients. But what they do is that before they'll put all the patient data. What they want to do is they want to put all the patient data, test results, et cetera, into an LLM and have it spit out the report, right? That's just what they want to do. They don't want to write the report anymore. But they can't do that because they're not allowed to share identifiable information and healthcare information with anybody outside the office. So what they do is they run the data through this anonymizer first, where they replace anybody's identifiable information like birth date and name with an ID number. Then they go and send all that stuff anonymized to the LLM, have it write the report, get the report back, and then de-anonymize the name and the identifying information. So there are thousands of healthcare providers doing that right now. So there's a way of doing that. I don't know how. I think that would still make some people somewhat queasy. That there's healthcare information there. There are, of course, no rules about that other than just HIPAA requirements, and there very much should be rules. I hope there someday are. But so those are sort of the caveats about the privacy issue. That said, the privacy issue is huge, right? Because we don't, as soon as you put anything into a website, any website, ChatGPT, whatever, it's no longer yours. You've lost control of it. So then we branch out from that into private models, which you mentioned. So you certainly can, if you want, create your own ChatGPT. You actually can. It's free. There are the four big models right now are, the OpenAI models. Then there's Claude from Anthropic. That's Claude, another LLM. Then there's Gemini, right? And the fourth one is Llama, which is the model made by Meta, the old Facebook company, the old Mark Zuckerberg. That's what he's doing now. Llama is an open source LLM, which means that you can download the whole thing if you want to. You can go to Cloudways or wherever your favorite hosting company is, get a server, install that Llama on that server, and you can have your own ChatGPT, right? You can have your own one. So, and the data will stay between you and that server, and it will never be shared with anybody. So if you want to do that, you can. Now, there's a level of expense to that. You have to run the server. You have to have somebody who knows how to do that kind of stuff, set it up. You have to be, there's also security issues there, right? Because what if you have to keep it updated and secure? Because if you let that slip, then then you might even be putting the data at even more risk than if you would have used a public model. But anyway, so that is definitely possible. There's another one called OPEA, which is OPEA. I think it stands for open. Anyway, whatever. It's another open source enterprise grade model that does more than just chatbots. And again, you can install it on your own on a server. Really good idea to fool around with. If you have the resources and time to do that, try it, because it's sort of the new frontier of this stuff in terms of how to keep your stuff totally private. And I think as it becomes sort of more known that you can have your own ChatGPT, I think more people are probably going to be interested in doing that. But yeah, so the privacy issues are definitely real, a bit more complex than I think people think they are, and something to keep in mind. That said, I think there's so much that you can do with this Gen AI without anything having to do without even touching the privacy issue. So for instance, like we said before, let's say you did a webinar and you just needed someone to write a summary. I mean, you want that stuff to be public, right? Like that's the point of it. It is to be public. So a lot of the communication stuff that nonprofits are doing, you're going to want to be public anyway. On the other hand, a lot of the donor stuff you're going to want to keep private, right? So you're going to want to either anonymize that or something. Or trust, if you trust the tech companies, then great. But I don't know how many of us really do at this point. Yeah. So that's really kind of one of the things, that's sort of the public versus private thing. I hope I answered that, without being too long-winded, but yeah.
You totally did. And it sounds like to me that it comes down to a matter of process. You have to make sure that the people who are feeding these algorithms and LLMs have the knowledge of knowing what to do in what situation. So it becomes more of a you problem in terms of the nonprofit to say this person can do it because they've been trained on how to either autonomize or not autonomize or whatever needs to be done before feeding the LLM. And then these people don't. So you have to make sure that there's certain guardrails within your organization to make sure you take full advantage of the LLM without kind of leaking information that should not be leaked. That was
For sure.
kind of like,
For sure, for sure. And I think that's a lot of what's happening now is talk about acceptable use policies.
right.
So some nonprofits have developed acceptable use policies where they've started to look at what's available, what tools their staff might want to use, which tools are okay to use, which tools are not okay to use. And there are more ethical issues than just the privacy issue, right? There's issues with bias and discrimination in the models. You need to know that if you're going to start using it. There's some people have concerns, rightly so, about the use of AI in general and whether it will contribute to inequality. Which is a big issue, and ethics and privacy. And then, of course, there's copyright issues too, which a lot of people are rightly fired up about. And then energy use too. There's a lot of energy that goes into developing these modules. Is it worth it? Is it a good idea? Whatever. So there's a lot of issues there. So some nonprofits have started to develop, acceptable use policies. There are some examples. If you go to N10's website, Nonprofit Technology Network, n10.org, they just released an AI tools page, which has on it a bunch of information, but one of which is a template for an AI use policy that you can use and adapt to your organization, or write to me or Alex or whatever for other examples. There are a lot of organizations that have created them that are good to look at and good to see, and you can use as a template for your organization too. But again, you just want people to know, like you said, sort of what are the risks and what's okay to do and what you guys don't want to do yet. The other thing I'll say about this is if you don't have an acceptable use policy and you haven't really talked about it at your organization yet, people are already using it. Okay. 90% of your staff, I swear, is using ChatGPT. Maybe they're, so it's not like if you're worried about starting this process because you don't want to give people the green light to use this technology, they're already using the technology. So it's time to start thinking about whether and how to use it and what circumstances to use it.
Yeah, I saw the N10 article today too, so that's kind of cool. A great starting point for a lot of nonprofits and AI.
Yeah.
Let's talk high level because you mentioned a few things about some of the benefits of AI, but I was wondering if you could, like we talked about use cases of it, but I'm thinking more about overall benefits. Like to your example earlier, when you have was it 100 people, if they all have interns, some people are concerned that you wouldn't need so many people at all. You could just let them go, maybe half, 80%. And the ones that remain, then they have the AI as opposed to keeping the 100 and they all each have their own assistant. So I know that's one legitimate concern that people have about losing jobs to AI. I know I talked to my niece who's now 11. She's big. She's really worried about that, which is cute in its own way, but it is a legitimate concern.
For sure.
I definitely want to talk about the concerns about using AI. But before we get there, I want to say on a more positive note of, there's a general trend, and there has been a general trend that if we look at the 60s compared to today, they said, when computers arrive, when we get all those things, it'll make our life easier. We'll have so much more leisure time. And
yes.
Actually, it never happened, right? The faster computers got, the more powerful they got, the more work we did, and the more was expected from you, not just at the work, 9 to 5, but also when you got home, because now we got phones and all that kind of stuff. So it almost had the opposite effect. Technology is, it opened up too many doors that we're never disconnected anymore, and therefore we can accomplish more and so forth. So can you see the same thing happening with AI, or is this AI finally going to be okay, now we can finally take our foot off the gas pedal and it'll take care of everything for us? Which also has pros and cons there too, but that's a different conversation. Like some of the benefits of AI that we hope to achieve and we can achieve today as a nonprofit.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't expect all of a sudden humans to change and become smart about self-care or something like that. Like, I don't think that's magically going to happen tomorrow. I do think that on average, the average nonprofit can take 20% of its rote, boring, inhuman tasks off its plate and give it to these willing, interns who love this kind of boring work. Does that mean you're going to take 20% of your year off? I really doubt it. I mean, that I don't see happening. I wish it would, but I don't think it will. I don't think that AI is going to take over. This is a huge generalization, right? I mean, this is a huge generalization. But for most of the people that I see it working at nonprofits, it's not going to take over their job. It can't do anybody's full job. But what it can do is that 20% of the boring, copy paste, repetitive type stuff. And you have more at a nonprofit. If you work at a nonprofit, you have more than enough human work to do, right? You're overflowing with, donors you should call, or people you should meet, or meetings you should have, or decisions you should make, or thinking about what your next campaign is going to be. I mean, these are things that only humans can do. I think the best case scenario for this type of technology is that we end up doing the most human, most satisfying type of work that requires thought and creativity and connection. And we end up not doing the boring soul killing stuff, like turning a list of people into a CSV of people. That's just terrible. That's the best case scenario. You know what I mean? That said, there's a worst case scenario as well. I mean, there's absolutely a worst case scenario. Which, I mean, I guess the medium worst case scenario is that a lot of people, like, that staffs will be cut, right? Because there won't be enough work to go around. That might be the case. One thing I do think that's interesting about inequality in AI, or considerations of jobs and economics and AI, is that the Venn diagram of things that AI is good at and things that and human jobs tends to be biggest at high-paying, high-educated, white-collar jobs, and smallest at jobs where you're on your feet. So there was somebody that is a great. I wish I had knew the name of this, but there was a study that someone did at Harvard. It was 3 economists, and they did a study, and they ranked the top 1,500 professions in the United States by most overlap with AI, and the top 20 of them, 18 of them were college professors of different types, business school professor, college, history professor, whatever, because those people are basically ingesting information and giving information, right? And so that AI is great at that. It's great at ingesting information and summarizing it to people. I mean, that's what it does. What it at the bottom of the list was like professional athlete, obviously, roofer, motorcycle mechanic was like very, very low. So it's an interesting thing, because I think in history, at least the recent history of technology, we're used to technological innovation taking over sort of what we would consider the lowest paying jobs. So technology, closing the factory, for instance. From with the AI technology, it's kind of the opposite. It's sort of it's the colleges that college professors that are hit first. So it's a bit different than normal, but it is definitely a risk. I mean, that may happen. And then, of course, one of the things that I find amazing about this technology is that there's also an incredibly scary worst case scenario, which is that AI kills all of us. You know what I mean? I mean, this is not probably, there's only a tiny % chance of this happening, but it's amazing to read interviews with people who are working on advancing AI technology and hopefully in their eyes reaching this place where we have advanced general intelligence, right? Which is what all of these labs are working on. By the way, what we're using in AI right now, Gen AI, is not OpenAI's final goal. That's not why they exist. They did not start OpenAI to create ChatGPT. ChatGPT is just an outgrowth of what they really are working on, which is this advanced general intelligence. And even people working on this, PhDs working on this, say that I'm working on something really exciting. There's a 99% chance it's going to be great for humanity, and there's a 1% chance it's going to end humanity, which to me blows my mind that there are people working on something that they admit might cause the end of the species, right? And this is a science fiction type thing. I don't think this is going to happen. But it's kind of amazing. And it's also kind of amazing it's not more discussed, right? We like I said earlier, big election in the United States today. Everybody's concerned about this election. That's all anyone can focus on. I haven't heard AI regulation or decisions about how and when to use AI or where it's getting researched or where it's getting developed once in the election, which blows my mind. We're talking about whether or not people in Springfield, Ohio are eating cats instead of are we working on technology that will end us? It's kind of an amazing thought to me. Now, again, I don't think this will happen. I think this is sort of silly to even talk about. But it is pretty astounding when you think about it. All that said, I do think the best case scenario for this type of technology, and really, I think this is a real best case scenario that will happen over the next couple of years, is that people at nonprofits are going to realize that a lot of the boring, terrible, soul-killing work they do is stuff that Gen AI can do for them. And I hope that happens, because then people will be able to focus on the things that are more human, talking to other people, connecting with other people, making plans, making decisions, being creative, that kind of stuff.
I'm a big optimist as well. I don't think it's 99 to 1. I heard different numbers, but let's stick with that because we want to stay optimistic.
Yeah. Even 1% is, that's way too high. Way too high.
Oh, I heard it was more than that, actually. But let's not go there because we want to keep it on a positive note. But again, for me, one of the things that as a geek especially, I'm a big Star Trek fan. And to me, that's like almost utopian society because there's no monetary anything. It's all the economy is not based on capitalism.
Yeah.
And currency is your merit, is what you're able to achieve. And the more you achieve, the more you're provided opportunities to. But all the basic necessities are all taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's a awesome goal to head towards in using AI, that it takes care of the stuff that we as humans shouldn't take care of. We can focus on the more humane parts of being human, to your point. The emails, the conferences, the handshaking, the looking in the eye, the hugging, the feeding type of stuff, and let AI just manage everything else that we just don't care about, doing the laundry and doing all these chores and doing all these things that we just don't need to do or don't want to do or can be outsourced. At least until AI starts coming up with emotions, and that's a different story altogether. But I'm pretty sure people are still going to want to talk to another human at some point because have empathy and all those different kinds of things that even an AI might try to simulate and might do it really well at one point. There's something still, person to person that cannot be replaced. Just like we have person to person meetings and virtual meetings, there's something very tangible and tactile about being in person and seeing someone and being able to shake their hand and hold them or whatever, versus being at a distance even. So all that to say is that there are definitely positive things that we can use AI for. I hope it stays in those channels, that it just augments our life and allows us to focus on things that only we can do and only we want to do. We'll see where life takes us, but it's definitely an interesting point, and I'm looking forward to seeing what will actually happen. It's an interesting ride. It's a great time to be alive.
It is.
And I'm going on a tangent here for a second, but I remember when I was a kid, I said I really wanted to experience something grand in my life, like aliens coming down and chances are it would be a bad idea for any of these things to happen. But, wouldn't it be cool to be part of a moment where, if you were at that pivotal moment during the Industrial Revolution to see the before and after, like that must have been such a cool experience, a life experience. And we are here. We're able to hopefully see this. Just the transition, a moment that flip is going to be interesting. It's going to be worthy of a witness.
It is, and we're going through it right now. It's amazing. There are so many moments where, to me, and I love this about technology, where occasionally you'll see a new technology or experience a new technology, and it will seem like magic. You know what I mean? And you're like, oh my God. And I remember the first cell phone being like that, first iPhone being like that, where I'm like, oh my God, I can get the internet on my screen on the iPhone. Not mine, I didn't have one, but it's my friend who had one. And I had that experience the other day when I was sitting at dinner with my daughter, who is fluent in Spanish. I don't know a word of Spanish. And I had heard that the translations on ChatGPT were good. And so we turned on voice mode on ChatGPT. And I said, hey, whatever. Mine's like a British woman. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to say some English. I'm like, hey, how's it going? They always go, it's good. How are you? They're always very positive. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to say some English words. Can you say them back to me in Spanish, and then listen for a response in Spanish and translate that back into English, and we'll have an ongoing conversation that way. And the lady's like, yeah, sure, let's go. And I said, okay. And so I asked I asked my daughter what she thought of the
pasta that I had made, because it was the first time I'd made this pasta with shrimp or whatever. And I'm like, hey, what do you think of this pasta and shrimp? Blah, blah, blah. It says it back to her in Spanish. And in Spanish, she says, it tastes like vomit. And then says it back to me. And then the phone told me it tastes like vomit. And I'm like, Ruby, what are you talking about? I mean, it was exactly what she said. And the tone that she said it in. It was just crazy. It blew my mind. I was like, this is bonkers. We have a translator, a voice. So I've had a number of those moments over the last year where I'm just like, this is insane. You know what I mean? I mean, you can just, anyway. So you're right. We're living through it. We're living through it now. It's going to totally change. I think it will change a lot more things than we think. And I think it will also change different things than we think. Not the things that we think will change. I think people will still work and get frustrated at work, and all that stuff will still happen. I mean, and get pissed and be bored and all that kind of stuff. That will definitely happen. But there will be things that we can't even anticipate that will change, that are just going to blow our minds.
Yeah, I mean, sense of purpose is not going to go anywhere. We need that, whether it's, obligatory or whether we choose to work or not, we still need a sense of purpose. So some people might be able to achieve that with work. Some might be able to achieve it through other means, but that is not going away. So
it's not. Do you think jobs will go away in terms of jobs for economic reasons will go away?
For a vast majority, yeah. I think that only a few people will actually need to work. Only a few will want to work. And the rest, I mean, I think the economy is definitely going to be impacted significantly by it. And there's no way, we talked about regulation, there's no way to stop this. Like if one country doesn't do it, another one will. So there's no foot off the gas pedal on this one. The first one that gets it, AGI, artificial general intelligence, is the one that wins, because there's just going to be so much further ahead than any other country. So like I'm looking at the time, like, holy crap, I could talk about this for another 3 hours. And there's like a whole bunch of questions here I didn't even get to, because we've kind of tangented a little bit away from nonprofits to talk about AI in general, which is fantastic. I mean, I'm really enjoying this conversation, but I also want to make sure we keep track of, let's maybe finish it with this one part, to bring it back to nonprofits as well.
Yes.
The two most important questions for me to ask you is, would the best way for a nonprofit to start using AI, if they're not using it already, would be, this Gen AI and ChatGPT and stuff like that? That's question one. And I'll throw in the question number two as well, is there's so much happening. To your point earlier, when you started that, tomorrow might be different than today. How can and should nonprofits keep track of what's happening? Like it's more than exponential now, or at least it's exponential. We're really past that hockey puck curve. There's no way a nonprofit can keep track of things. How do they, in a certain sense, even a little bit, keep up to date on what's going on? Maybe that's a better question.
Yeah.
We can skip the first one. I like the second question more. Let's end it on that one.
Okay, so let's be specific about how you can keep track of stuff. I'll tell you how I keep track of stuff. The first thing is to know that you're never going to know everything that's going on, and that is fine. Nobody does, not even the experts. Number two, there are 3 places that I would recommend you follow. Okay, number one, there's a guy named Ethan Mollick, who is a business school professor who posts on LinkedIn about AI every day. And I have learned more from that gentleman than anyone else about in AI. So go on LinkedIn and find him and follow him. He also wrote a book that you can read called Co-Intelligence, which is how to use these tools as assistants, which is really, really good. Number 2 is Vox. If you've ever heard of Vox Media, they have an excellent AI channel on their news site where there is information about AI coming down the pipe. And so it's been super helpful to sort of read that. It does sort of present the information from not a tech standpoint, but a sort of social / normal person standpoint, which is helpful. The third thing, and this is a little tiny bit of a plug, but one of the things I want to do at BFC Digital, we haven't done it yet, is I want to create a community of nonprofit / impact people who are experimenting with these AI tools. And so the prerequisites would be sign up for a $20 a month account at either ChatGPT or Claude. Start thinking as you're going through your daily life. Have a little person on your shoulder, a little angel on your shoulder, reminding you, noticing when you're doing boring work you hate, and think, can ChatGPT or Claude do this for me? Just think that real quick, and once in a while you'll come up with answers. And then write to me, because I want to start a Slack community of nonprofit / impact folks who are experimenting with this technology, because there's so much that it can do. And the trouble I think that a lot of people have with it right now is use cases. When should I use it? What should I use it on? What should I not use it on? And the best way to figure out use cases is to know how other people are using it. So I want to create a community where we are sharing those stories. So this work, Claude worked really well to get me a wireframe of my annual dinner website, right? Or ChatGPT did a great job of taking this PDF and pulling out all the people that were mentioned, or whatever. This other Gemini, you did a great job of creating a Google Doc report for my board about these 7 things, whatever. I want to create a community that does that. So let's do that at some point. And that's really the other one. That's the third one, is just talk to people who are using it, and trying to find use cases, because that's the biggest challenge. So Ethan Mollick, Vox, and use cases / let's do a Slack community.
To continue the plug, because I want to make sure people are also aware, you provide AI training, AI strategy, and AI implementation. So how can people get in touch with you to get access to these kinds of services?
Yes. So go to bfcdigital.com. If you're interested in just the AI stuff, bfcdigital.com/AI. Or, Ben Freda, you can write me, ben@bfcdigital.com, just reach out. And always around, really interested in this AI stuff. It's really interesting, really fascinating. Love to spread the word, help people figure out how to use it, when to use it, and what they can do with it.
Awesome, Ben. Listen, I know we could talk along. I mean, I'm excited to continue this conversation, let's say, on your podcast. But for today, I want to really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks so much. It was a lot of fun. Really interesting. Thanks again.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.